That was not the general perspective about who the people at OSHA were.
There's crews that think, well, how are we going to get any work done if we're doing stretching in the morning, we're doing toolbox talk?
Driving by and not saying something becomes a much bigger problem in the background.
I think having to respond to some of these incidents or going to do an employee interview for somebody that had just gotten paralyzed, that was really eye-opening experience, and it really does give you an appreciation of why we do what we do. So.
Welcome to the Beyond the Breaker podcast.
Well, everyone, and our esteemed guest, Kyle Casey, we are here with another episode of Beyond the Breaker. I think it's going to be fun, even though we're going to talk a lot about safety stuff today. As we tuck into this, we're going to cover some things about your current role, your former role, former OSHA employee. And I think we're going to do, some review of some of the technical things about it. I think we're going to talk a little bit about how does it apply and what are good things about OSHA that we can learn and safety in general. And we're just going to see where that conversation goes. So with that, Kyle, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tell us who you are and what it is you do here.
Kyle Casey. I'm a safety manager for Hunt Electric. So right now I'm in charge of mostly southern Minnesota. So Rochester, New Ulm, Mankato, and then also some work up the metro.
So give us just enough background there so folks know what's up.
I've been in safety for about 14, 15 years total. I first started actually in the military, believe it or not, in the Army. And
on the safety side in the military?
On the safety side.
Okay.
So I was with an engineer unit. So we did carpentry, masonry, general construction. And it was really a learning curve, and you learned a lot with people that actually did that for a living. So we had operators, we had carpenters, we had electricians.
Interesting.
And it was really the safety wasn't really that much of a factor back at that time when I first got in. And as the years went on, it started becoming a factor. So they designated a safety person for some of the projects. Yeah. So you give a safety briefing prior to the project starting, and then as you get going, you're overseeing safety, you're still working, but then after you do an after-action review and just go over, hey, what did we do well? What could we improve on? If there's any incidents, anything like that, you would cover it. And that was really interesting. They had a really in-depth safety protocol if you're doing live fire or going down range or anything like that. But just doing general construction on Camp Ripley in Minnesota, it wasn't very present. But as we did a deployment in Iraq, it was a lot more stringent and a lot more of a core focus for the Army. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's got to be intense, right? Like what you do now, probably not as intense.
Not as intense. Yeah.
Still
it could be worse.
Still important.
I'm glad there are
not
regular live fire safety briefings.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
All right. So you did, you worked in a safety capacity in the Army, and then from there?
Yeah, so then I got back, and believe it or not, my folks actually did work for OSHA for a short time back in the 80s. It was kind of interesting. So it just seemed like a natural route to go, just with my experience, and finished my undergrad, then did a safety and health degree, and a position opened up at OSHA. So that was about 2012 when I started there.
What were you doing when you started? What did you eventually grow into before coming to Hunt for OSHA? Yeah,
so with OSHA, I started on the compliance side of things. So that was enforcement compliance, call it the same thing. And that was really interesting starting there. I remember going cube to cube and just asking those investigators, hey, when are you going out next? Can I tag along? Just to learn, just to see where they're going. And one day you would be out on a high-rise construction in downtown Minneapolis. The next day you're out on a residential site. The next day you could be at a manufacturing facility or food processor, whatever, and everything in between. And there was a lot there, and there's a lot of good people there where you'd ask questions and they would help you out. And, they would have the machine guarding expert there. They'd have a fall protection expert, or like the construction ways you could go to. And when you're first starting out, you have a lot of questions. So you're taking pictures, you're asking questions. And a lot of those people, they're really great, and they helped you out along the way.
When you say you were at a high rise and you're at residential the next day, how do they choose where they're going? Is there a rhyme or reason? Is it like going down a list and saying, hey, we got to get to this one, this one, this one?
Yeah.
Until they're all checked off, or what is that like?
Before I started, they did either your construction or your industry. It was one or the other.
Got it.
And then right before I started there, they changed it where they would cross-train where you do both.
Okay.
And everybody kind of naturally gravitated to what they were comfortable with, but you could still do both. So that was, I was doing both for a while, but mostly construction on the compliance side.
Huh. Interesting.
I like what you said there, and you said it a couple of times. Really great people there, and I love hearing that. Like, I have some background in the industry and as a tradesperson, and very much that was not the general perspective about who the people at OSHA were and how they were going to behave. Maybe unpack a little bit more about like what are some of the things that those folks are doing. How are they helping out? How are they making things better? And
yeah. And you learned a lot from going out with them because they've done it so many times. And, the questions they're asking, what questions they're asking some of the employees when they're doing employee interviews, the information they're trying to gather to maybe support a citation, how they're going to get there from asking questions and documenting it and taking photos and measurements and all that sort of stuff. Their approach to handle the employers, tough situations.
Yeah, I imagine there's some seriously uncomfortable conversations going to happen sometimes.
Yeah, and everybody's different, So some people might go into a facility where it's minimal citations, if any, and then you might have somebody else where all of a sudden they have a whole notebook full of citations they're going to issue to the employer. It just really kind of depends on who you get, but they do try to be consistent as possible.
Yeah.
When they're there. But you also learn some of the things not to do. You don't want to escalate anything with the employer, and it really does take a little bit of time to kind of navigate through those difficult situations when you have a disgruntled employer and how to explain why you're there, what you're there to do. And it seems like the more that they kind of understand your job and what you're there to do, and ultimately, advocate for the safety and health of employees, I think they come around a little bit if you handle those situations better.
I just thought of a question. So I'm going to ask it.
Yeah, roll with it.
So we at Hunt, obviously, right, we have people in the industry, and I'm sure at all companies, there's people in the industry that can kind of look at a drawing set or look at, a wall, and they say, hey, I want to install 4 lights, or I want to do something. And there's some whizzes out there that can just say, yep, it's going to cost you that. During your time with OSHA, were there those people able to drive by a site and just like in one pass, be like, safety violation, just saw it. Yep, got to go check it out. Does that happen a lot? Just like even the drive-by?
It does. Like drive-bys, or if they're like to and from work, if there's a job site.
Oh, I just bet they love it, right?
They're always looking up. They're always looking up, and if they see something, they might have a citation or a reason to go into that site. Because the last thing they want is drive by and see an obvious hazard and then find out later that somebody got hurt.
Well, yeah, and I shouldn't say laugh a little bit or joke on that of like they love it, but it's truly that. It's driving by and not saying something becomes a much bigger problem in the background versus just make a point to address it right away. You can show up late to work if you were out on site because you saw something, so it's good.
Yeah, and the reality is if you have 2 job sites across the street from each other and they're driving by and one doesn't have guardrails and
sure.
And the housekeeping isn't as well, and just all the other telltale signs, that's the one they're going to go into. It's going to be more fruitful for them, and ultimately it's going to have a bigger impact if they go into that site versus the other one.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to this episode, Andrew and I and a couple other folks, talking a little bit about, some of our assumptions and maybe biases about how OSHA behaves or kind of their scope of responsibility. And I think, I'm suspecting here that there's a lot of misinformation that's out there that they want to, get you, right? They want to catch you doing something bad, or that, it's always a negative thing for employers. Or I got to reference some notes here that like as an employee, I can't say anything because I'm just going to get fired for saying something. So maybe like dispel some of those myths and help us understand like how it can really be a positive thing both for the employee or the employer.
Yeah. So you brought up retaliation. So that's a big one. And it's really important for everybody to know that, OSHA is there to protect safety and health and the well-being of the employees. And you have a right as an employee to be provided a safe workplace by the employer. So you have the right to call in for a complaint, for example. And that's all done anonymously. And when I was doing those inspections, you get called out to a complaint. I didn't even know the name of the person that did the complaint. You just had the complaint item, you had the employer and the address, and then you stop and verify if that complaint is valid or not, but you don't know who it was.
Sure.
But they actually do have a discrimination unit within OSHA that's what they specifically deal with.
Oh, interesting.
Is if they call in a complaint and then the employer fires somebody or they demote them or something happens, they get retaliated against, they'll do their own investigation with the employer and make sure that it's right.
Good.
It's safe to say that if I'm on a job site, whether it's my employer maybe not mitigating a hazard the way I think they should, or I notice something else, maybe the general contractor on site has a hazard they're not mitigating, I should feel pretty safe being able to call in anonymously and just say, hey, can you send somebody out? They don't have good ladder access, or the guardrails are pretty flimsy. And I shouldn't have to worry about anything like that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of employers nowadays are really keen into that, and they don't want to have issues. They want to have a safe working environment out there, and they want to know about that stuff so they can take care of it. So I think step one would just be bringing it up to the employer and say, listen, this is what we've been seeing out here. And most of the time it does get taken care of. There are instances where maybe it's a general contractor and they disregard it or whatever happens, and that's where a complaint would come in.
Sure.
If it's not getting taken care of on its own.
Looking at some of the notes as well, one of the things we talk about on here is, the cost of and the price of safety. Can you provide some insight towards, what's really the difference, and you don't need exact numbers, but upfront cost for implementing safety protocols versus the back end cost of when you don't do that, what happens whether it's an injury, accident, whatever it may be, or a citation, a fine.
Yeah. And that's another misnomer too, is safety is expensive, and it's actually the complete opposite. So So if you are an employer and you do have an incident, you have an injury with one of your workers, well, guess what? Now you're paying somebody to be out of work, and you have to pay somebody to backfill that position to do that same work. And that's not even getting into, insurance rates going up, workers' comp claims, and just employee morale. I mean, if you have a company that disregards safety, I think that really translates down to baseline employees, whereas you have a good company, it's like they actually care about me. They're asking questions. They're providing me with the proper PPE. They're giving me proper training. Like, it motivates people a lot. I think that really does go a long way when the employees know that the employer has their back and they're providing a good environment for them. Yeah,
it's that building of a culture, right? You can have a company culture, but your company culture has to have a safety culture within it. It's kind of got to be first and foremost too. And it makes a lot of sense when you start factoring into the cost to pay somebody to not work, and then another person to work for the person that's not working, right? It's a spider web of wow, I should have just paid for the training at the front end and the correct equipment and all that stuff.
Yeah, and in construction too, when you're bidding for a project, the reality is sometimes if you have two companies jockeying for position for a project, and they're pretty comparable, and you have one company that has higher OSHA citation rates or more injuries.
Yeah.
I don't know, honestly, how often that happens, but I know it does. And if that's really high and it's above and beyond competitor B, they might go with somebody else for that type of work.
Yeah. I think it's extremely prevalent now, and I'm sure it always has been, but everything that we get through the door as an RFP or an opportunity to bid is, what are your safety numbers?
Yeah.
There's stats.
Every single time it feels like.
There are stats, and there's a reason that they're stats, because people want to know them. People want to see that they can rely on you to be safe on their job site, because it's just added cost for everybody at the end of the day. It's people first, but then obviously it's the prevention, the costs, the headaches.
Yeah, and there's lots of resources out there too that doesn't cost any money. So, for example, when I was with compliance, I was there for about 6 years, and then worked my way into the consultation program. Just naturally how the scale works, and more experienced people tend to end up on the consultation side. And if you're greener, you come in with compliance, but that's a free service. And I don't know if everybody knows about that, but if you are...
The floor is yours, man.
Yeah.
What does a consultation look like?
Yeah, if we're talking about costs for safety, and you wanted OSHA to come in and you wanted to work with OSHA proactively, you can call them. You can invite them in to your workplace. If it's manufacturing, if it's industry, if it's somebody like Bear, if it's construction project, they will come out for free. They'll do a mock OSHA inspection. There's no citations or penalties or anything like that. They're just there to help you as a consultant. And that's a free service through the state, and it's not just Minnesota. It's every state. They just call it a little bit different. So, federal states they call it the Voluntary Protection Program, the VPP. But it's the same thing in Minnesota. You can just call them and have them come out. So, they'll provide training. They'll come out and do air monitoring for you for silica respirators, for example. And you can dictate what you want them to do. I mean, if you want them to write up a safety program for you, if you're just getting started, they'll help you out with that. So there's lots of resources out there available for employers. So that argument of it costs money and it's too expensive, I just don't think it holds water anymore.
Yeah.
I like that.
Not with that program. I mean,
So let's keep going down that path a little bit. You know, Andrew said the word culture, like a safety culture. And I'm sure that you've seen small projects, huge projects, everything in between. And when I think about, you know, it could be a small contractor, it could be a gigantic one. But what are maybe some of the trends that you see about like teams creating a positive safety culture and maybe companies that aren't doing it or maybe aren't doing it well yet? You know, I want to be optimistic that eventually they will. Like, what are some good things about things that you've seen with people creating that positive safety-minded culture?
Positive safety-minded culture just means that they're spending the time and the energy and resources and investing in safety. It's not just something you can do overnight. It's going to take some time to implement a culture. But a lot of it is just communicating and letting your employees know, like, hey, we want to help. We might not be able to catch everything, but we want you to know that if you're pointing out any unsafe acts or anything that you need, we'll get you squared away, but we need to know about it first. And that would be kind of the start of it to kind of get the ball rolling. And,
that openness and awareness.
Yeah. And some employees just feel like they did something wrong if they're pointing out like a near miss, or if they see something that another trade is doing, or, they sometimes feel like they're slowing the progress of a project down. And I think a lot of it, just with culture, is communicating that to your general workforce.
I like that. It's a really simple place to start, is just being open to the idea that I want to help make sure that this stuff is safe. I'm not going to punish you for it. Let's just talk about it. Mm-hmm. And the other piece that stands out for me is, the time. Yeah. Committing the time to have that conversation, and whether that's, at 7 a.m. as you're getting rolling on a project site, you take that 10 minutes and are just intentional, or, before the project ever kicks off, you bring in that crew for a half a day or whatever it is and walk through that stuff.
And I think it can be really intimidating at first too, when you start rolling some of those things out. If you're not used to it, there's crews that think, well, how are we going to get any work done if we're doing stretching in the morning? We're doing toolbox talks, and we have to come in and do training. And all those different things that's required maybe by a general contractor. And, the reality is I think people, they get used to it and you get more efficient with it. And it's just part of your normal workday to do a lot of that stuff. Mm-hmm. So when you're not used to it, it just seems like it's not really possible until you.
Yeah. But normalizing that helps make it that habit. And,
I would say so.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's when the culture is developed, right? Because it's like, I think we see it with everything that says it's a good culture. Is they'll put a billboard up or a sign in their office that says, we have this culture. And it's like, we have a great safety culture. Well, if you don't have great safety stats, you actually have a great safety culture? Probably not, right? But it's the time, like you said, that you recognize is important, and then just actually doing it, and doing it with a purpose. So it's good. Are you seeing... with your time with OSHA and even obviously your time at Hunt, are you seeing a bigger emphasis on that culture building, not just at Hunt, but across the industry?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the point we talked about earlier, is investing in safety and actually having it be an investment.
Yeah.
And whereas before it was looked at just something that you had to do, and it's going to take resources and things like that. And now it's actually, there's a cost to it. Now it's an investment from everything that we already mentioned, but also just a general culture.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
So we have a list of top 5 injuries on job sites. Do you want to guess them
Let me
in order?
guess. Let me guess. So is this for industry, construction, or both?
Nope. It just says these are the top 5 injuries on job sites.
Okay, let me guess.
And just before you do, like this is going to go down in infamy. Like this
That's
is on
fine.
the record.
I'm pretty confident.
All right.
They don't need to be in order. How about that?
Strains and sprains.
We're going to give that a green light.
Falls.
Good.
Struck by hazards. Or caught between hazards.
Yep.
Okay. Ergonomics, musculoskeletal disorders, repetitive motion.
Oh, that's not on
No,
my
but we
list.
should have said top 6.
Oh, okay. Maybe that would have been 6 then.
Yeah.
What am I,
Cares? I don't know if we're all too safe.
which one am I forgetting?
It's near and dear to our section of the industry.
Okay, electrical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Things that can go wrong there.
Absolutely.
So part of this, and we should have said specific, but and how to avoid them was the additional part on our list. So when we talk falls, especially in the construction industry, right? Ladders, lifts, heights in general. What are ways that we can, the industry as a whole, can avoid falls entirely, but also make sure that they are recognizing where some fall hazards are and just get ahead of it so everybody is, again, we're talking about building a culture to understand that, nope, I'm going to recognize that that's a potential risk first and address it right away as opposed to when I'm 10 feet in the air and then like, ooh, maybe this isn't a good idea.
Yeah, falls is always at the top of the list for injuries. I remember when I was with compliance, part of that job was responding to injuries and
Yeah.
fatalities. Not to be
Yeah.
doom and gloom, but that was
Yeah.
the reality of the job. And I would say 7, 8 times out of 10, if it was a construction site, it's because somebody fell from something. But it's a really broad category. So it could be a fall from a ladder, it could be a fall from a flight of stairs or scaffolding or a roof or pretty much anything. I think the equipment has come a long way over the years. It's a lot easier to use. It's lighter. It's cheaper. Things like that. But we have to identify some of these hazards first before we can find mitigation strategies. So once again, going back to the communication, the pre-task planning, toolbox talks, things like that, so people are aware of some of those hazards and fall hazards to begin with so we can start addressing it at that point.
Is it safe to say then, like, really, it starts with awareness, right? Let's look around, pick our head up, look at it, talk about it. Is that a potential hazard or not? And then talk about mitigation. Fair?
I think the tough part with electrical is you kind of have the double-edged sword of the electrocution standpoint of it and the fall doubling up, right? That's when you're working at heights and you're wiring or whatever it may be, one thing happens first and it's going to lead to the second part. So like you said, it's understanding what that is right away, the pre-task planning. And when it comes to field leadership, we talk the leadership standpoint of, a top down, right, or in a culture building. When we're in the field, what are some things that field leaders can do, and then working their way down to the experienced journey workers, the experienced apprentice who's been on the site for a while, all the way down to the person who is, week one on the job. What are good practices for those field leaders to do to just make sure that they're recognizing where the risks are and implementing a good safety culture on the job site specific? Because every job site's different as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say just first and foremost, lead by example. That would be at the top of my list. So if we're preaching PPE, you better have your PPE on as the foreman or, field leader, whoever it is. And then just being relatable. And I think a lot of people knew coming in, if you're an apprentice, we've talked about that before, where you're really impressionable when you first start your first couple of jobs. Talking from apprentices, it seems like they always remember their first job that they had or they're assigned to, or their first and second one, and who their foreman was. And I think if they have a good leader that's leading by example and properly communicating and separating themselves from just being somebody that's on the crew to actually being a leader that they can look up to, I think that goes a long way. And just everything that you're requiring, whether it's toolbox talks, you're putting in the proper time and put some thought behind it, and you're passionate about it, and you can convey that to your work crew. I think that really does go a long way.
I love that.
It's a really good message. Yeah. And the perfect example is if we require PPE and you don't wear yours, is anybody else going to do it? Probably not.
Right.
Right. So
Yeah, you got to walk
great
that
example.
walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys have talked mentioned it a couple of times, and I'm going to ask you to talk about it a little bit more. You've said pre-task planning, and it's pretty self-evident that you're going to talk about a thing before you do it. You're going to have a plan before you go do the action. But a lot of times, we got small contractors, or maybe I'm on a residential crew and there's just 4 of us who do framing, and on to the next, then on to the next. What could pre-task planning in its simplest form look like for somebody who doesn't have a robust safety plan and doesn't have 8 dedicated safety employees? What could pre-task planning look like for somebody like that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think if you're working in construction, even if you're been doing it for a year or 2 or 3 years or more, I think you don't need to have a master's degree in safety a lot of times to identify certain hazards. This could potentially get me hurt, right? Yeah, well, we can talk to somebody that can tell you what standard that is and get you all the specifics. But yeah, this might be a problem. But discussing that, I think bringing it up prior to actually working and just getting a plan together, similar to lockout tagout. How are we going to do it? What type of equipment do we need? Who's going to be in charge? And just we have a rough outline and a plan, and we have the right equipment out there to do our work safely. So to catch a lot of those problems prior to us even starting.
And like in that scenario where it's a small crew, I remember being on a small residential framing crew. It's just like 2 minutes. Here's the plan for the day. Here's who's doing what. This is the sequence that we're going to go through, and the tools that we're going to use to get it done. Can be really simple, I think.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to take a super long time, and then empowering everybody else in your group to pipe up and bring forth any issues that they have as well. So, you want a leader kind of, running the show and kicking off the meeting and navigating the meeting, but also empowering and giving everybody a voice to bring up any potential issues.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of posters around in publications that OSHA has. Are there any of you? And I ask that because there's a stretch and flex, right? During your time for compliance or consulting, were they ever like, hey, we need you photo op? You just got to go through
Are you
the
in the
stretches.
OSHA brochure somewhere?
No?
I am not. And if I was, I didn't know about it, and I'm probably not there anymore, but no.
If you were, we were going to show it on the podcast. But
If you guys don't mind, I want to shift a little bit. We've been talking lots about physical safety, and I don't want to diminish that. Cutting a finger off is permanent, right? Falling is terrible, all that kind of stuff. But there's this other side of it, and actually later this season we're going to have a different guest on, and we're going to talk really specifically about mental health and suicide prevention in the industry at large, and specific with trades folks. When you think about safety and that kind of mental side of it, what are maybe some things that you've noticed in the industry? And I'm not asking you to speak for OSHA, whether there's a policy or a standard or not. What are some of the things that you've seen, and maybe where can we go with really supporting mental health and that sort of, maybe it's overused, psychological safety as it relates to the work that we do?
Yeah, and it's a very, very important topic. Construction workers suffer from a very high level of suicide and mental health issues and things like that. So it's definitely been at the forefront the last few years, I've noticed, where it wasn't so much before. We're talking about fall hazards and electrocution hazards and that sort of thing. But I noticed the last 5 years or so, it's really taken a foothold in a lot of the topics that people are going over, whether it's a toolbox talk or training or something like that. But a lot of it is you're out there with the team. And I think it's really important to be able to determine if there's just something off with one of your buddies at work, and asking them the question of, are you okay? Do you need help? Is everything going on? It doesn't have to be like really formal like that, and be like, dude, how are you doing today?
Yeah.
Is there something you want to talk about? And just, making it more common or more allowed for people to bring up issues like that, mental health issues, so they can get the help that they need. But I've really, after being in the military, I've seen that a lot with, battle buddies in the Army going through those similar situations. So it definitely hits home for me personally. So I'm very relieved that it's gotten a lot more attention over the past few years.
Yeah.
Can you take that another step further and like kind of put yourself in those shoes? And I'm not asking you to reveal secrets or anything, but like if you're the one who's struggling, what are some ways that you could bring that up? How can you, start to advocate for yourself, or what would you encourage others to do on their crews to say, look, I'm struggling with this thing at home, or it could be a thing at work.
Yeah, find somebody that's close to you and talk to them about it. That would probably be the first step. There's lots of resources out there to go get help, but just talking about it helps a lot. But then you can go into some of the secondary things too, and I think that goes into some of the other incidents that we're talking about, is just taking care of yourself. And just the basic things we talk about, that's not really popular with a lot of people, but it's exercise and, getting a good night of sleep and eating healthy and all those sorts of things is going to help out a lot too. But you do need a support structure at the end of the day of just somebody you could talk to.
Yeah, I think you're right there in talking about, if you take care of yourself a little bit physically, like you say, eat well, try and get a good night's rest, stay hydrated, that kind of stuff, it's going to allow you to show up a little bit better at work. And I think that's like really parallel on the safety side of it. Come with your PPE, have a pre-task plan, communicate that, and you're probably going to have better physical safety too. I think those kind of go together really well.
Can you lay out, and I know there's one big one obviously, but what are some of the resources, whether you are someone that's going to, that is struggling and wants to call someone that they might not be close with somebody on the job site. So who could they call? Or if I'm an individual and somebody on my job site told me that they're struggling, who could I call to get them the help they need? Or I should say, what are some options there?
Yeah, with us, we have the program called Team. And it's not even just for you, it's even for your immediate family members too, that they'll help out with. So that would be a good step to start there.
Yep.
And like keeping that specific to Hunt for just a minute, that Team is part of our like employee support or something. I should probably know the acronyms, but it's part of like the benefits that we have. And it's not just, employee assistance
program.
Yeah. Oh, you get the
I want to let you struggle through it.
You get the HR Gold Star for today. But that's not like for office employees only. That's for anybody who's a part of our organization to be able to reach out, and they can have some resources there to help bridge the gap short term and help give them that place to talk to.
Absolutely. Just a conversation over the phone, or they do in-person visits as well.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think when you look at what you talked about as the OSHA standpoint and the consultation, and then you talk about Team, right? And it's like the resources there, it's very clear. The narrative of like, oh, it's bad, just shouldn't be there. Because there are two resources right there that their end goal is to keep people safe and prioritize safety and keep people safe and help them through issues. Where they might get bad reps, it's like, wow, the best thing they do is pretty much what every human being could need at some point in their life, not just in construction. So, Team is incredible.
And I appreciate you saying too that it's not just for the employee, but like also your immediate family members. If somebody's got a thing, I'm not a therapist. I don't know how to solve that thing. But if I have, one of my teenage kids as a thing, like, here's the phone. Just talk to them for a little bit.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I want to do you guys have any other OSHA myths that we want to bust today?
You might.
It sounds like you do.
Agenda. The floor is yours, sir.
I'm trying to think now. You got me stumped here.
Standards are too complicated to follow. I think you kind of already answered this one. It's like a lot of it seems to be common sense. Right? If you look at something like, that seems a little risky. I don't need to know the standard. I should probably just
a lot of them are.
Right?
Some of them can be tricky.
Okay.
And they do a pretty good job with having certain directives for certain subparts that might get a little bit more complicated. So like, what do they mean by this? And a lot of times, if you're asking that question, a lot of other people already have, and they'll have a directive written for it. Okay. So it's not a standard, but it basically tells you the essence of the standard and what OSHA wants to see to be compliant. They're not going to tell you and give you instructions on what to do, but they're giving you more information on what they're looking for to be compliant.
Sure. Do you have a particular, I'm sorry.
Well, they also have directives for the OSHA investigators too that they'll follow. So if you encounter this situation, the investigator is supposed to cite training, or if option B, they'll cite for machine guarding. And it's just a way to just make it a little bit easier to understand exactly what they're looking for. But also call OSHA. Like, you can call them anonymously and be like, what do you guys mean by this standard? Like, what do you want us to do?
Yeah.
This is the situation we're encountering. We see this standard here. Does that apply to us? And if so, how can we comply? So, and even compliance can answer questions like that. But if it's more involved, they'll probably refer you over to consultation. But either way,
Yeah.
you
Somebody's
can get
gonna
that
answer.
squared away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like that. Like, this is, in some ways, it's so simple. If you don't understand that section, if it seems too complicated, just call.
Yeah.
Just call. I imagine on the interweb, there's things that you can look up as far as those directives and interpretations as well. Yeah.
Do you have a
So
favorite
the-
standard?
Yes.
A favorite standard?
Yeah.
Probably, fall protection maybe, just because I've seen it so many times
Sure.
and it needs to be there.
Yeah.
I was hoping you were going to say like signaling for helicopter cranes.
2.116784.
Yeah, we need chapter and verse on this one.
The other myth is just because you're OSHA compliant doesn't mean that no one's going to get hurt either. That's another one that's out there. Well, we're compliant, so we're good. And it's like, well, it takes a lot more than that. There's still opportunities to get hurt, even if we're compliant with every standard.
Yeah.
And how can someone recognize that, right? What's the next step once you get all right, we're compliant. What should we be doing? What should field leaders be doing, people in the field, to say, okay, we're compliant, great, but here's how we have to maintain being compliant.
Best practices, I would say. So a lot of those go above and beyond, your OSHA requirements. So a good example of that would be like ergonomics. They just actually did pass a new standard for ergonomics, but it's very specific to larger distribution centers. But for construction or typical industry, they don't have anything for ergonomics. So that would be kind of maybe the next step.
Yeah.
Well, we're compliant, but let's start trying to work our way into some of the best practices. What can we do better?
Yeah. So that somebody's
of
not going to get an
OSHA's.
overuse injury or something strange from ergonomics.
Yeah, and OSHA, it shouldn't be looked at as the Bible. It should be looked at as just a general outline of requirements that we need to meet by law. They're not recommendations; they are actual law. So I guess it's law enforcement when you're OSHA enforcement, but there's a lot more to it than just OSHA standards when you get into safety.
Yeah. There's a human element to it.
Yeah, a little bit of common sense, a little bit of communication. We've talked, front and back about OSHA, but I recognize too that there are other industry bodies, there are best practices and things like that. If you were going to help, if there's some person listening to this who's really excited about safety, what are maybe some other places that folks could look at or learn about as it relates to safety-related things that are outside of maybe OSHA or their direct employer?
I would say training would be one of them, just scheduling training and just getting more exposure to just safety in general. Most of the training that I've been in, we're not focused just on OSHA standards, just a general safety training.
Who puts on that kind of stuff?
So OSHA consultation, they'll do training. The Minnesota Safety Council is really good at providing training as well. There's tons of consultants out there that you could look up and find.
Are there any, do vendors do that if we're going to rent, scissor lifts from them or aerial lifts?
That'd be a great example of that.
Okay.
So if we're going to, a rental company for lifts, they'll do a forklift certification or they'll do mobile elevating work platform training or something like that. You just need to ask them and schedule it.
That's fantastic. Because sometimes you may not have somebody in-house who is an expert, who has been trained to be a trainer. And heck, why wouldn't you lean on that vendor, that equipment supplier, whoever it is? Because
Absolutely.
they do it all day, every day, specific to their equipment.
Yeah.
I love that.
Since we're talking heights, and I think we're probably close to wrapping up, but in your experience through compliance, do you, at the top of your mind, know what the highest you've ever been on a job site to look at a safety violation or potential?
The
Talking about
highest,
high rises, right?
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
I would say there was a downtown high rise, I remember, downtown Minneapolis. So
yeah.
PT construction,
The tallest building is down there.
40, 50 floors,
Yeah.
something like that.
Up there, open air.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Kind Kyle, before we sign off on this, kind of take it any which way you want. But what are things you want to leave folks with? And whether that's a summary or encouragement or a direction for them to go, like, what do you want to leave folks with?
Well, I would say, fortunately or unfortunately, at responding to serious injuries and fatals at OSHA, that was part of the job. I don't think a lot of people have that experience. You get into safety and you understand the reason we're doing it and that sort of thing. And yeah, that makes sense. I think having to respond to some of these incidents or going to do an employee interview for somebody that had just gotten paralyzed, that was my age, very active person, and you got to sit there and ask them questions about what led up to their incident of why they fell in the first place. It was really, really eye-opening experience, and it really does give you an appreciation of why we do what we do. So if I were to say anything, is not to take shortcuts. Don't feel bad for having a work crew take that extra step that they need to, or not being afraid of being calling maybe a little bit nitpicky or something like that when you're discussing safety or talking about abatement options to address certain hazards out there in the field. I think that experience really changes you, and I think if you haven't had it before, just appreciate that a little bit and just look at it from that standpoint.
Yeah, very well said.
Yeah, that's thinking about those injuries that have a permanent, lasting effect, and that's a big deal. And it took 1 second.
Yeah, and you're not just affecting yourself. It's your family, your kids, or whoever else. So. Does go a long way, and it's glad we're doing what we do, and I think we have a really good team here.
Yeah,
good. Well, thank you. Obviously, a lot of questions, a very important topic, but right person in the chair to answer them. So, thank you for joining.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, we'll share some of those resources that we talked about a little bit. I know some of them are only for Hunt employees, but I think that we can also post in the notes and potentially on screen with whatever wizardry that is, some of those resources so folks have access to things like consultation and some of those resources.
Outstanding.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Boom.
So, real quick, how many OSHA violations are on this?
I was going to ask that during the episode. I showed up with that. I thought about that. I'm like, that's actually probably not a good idea.